Hey everybody, welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to be...
That's a great analogy. To really get the full picture of the harm, we've got to go back to the beginning, you know?
Yeah.
The roots of modern credit systems. Think about the Industrial Revolution, the rise of big banks. It was a time of massive economic change, but not everybody got to enjoy those benefits equally.
So while everybody else was building their financial futures, Black communities were kind of left out in the cold.
Sadly, yeah. During Reconstruction after the Civil War, Black Americans faced systematic exclusion from these institutions.
Wow.
They were denied loans, they got slapped with unfair interest rates. Basically, they were blocked from all the opportunities that credit was supposed to provide.
So we're not just talking about, like individual prejudice here. This was like baked into the system.
Absolutely. One really powerful example is the story of the Freedmen's Bank.
Oh, yeah. I remember learning about that.
It was established in 1865 to help formerly enslaved people build some financial stability. It held so much promise,
Right.
but then it collapsed because of mismanagement and fraud.
Oh, man. Can you imagine?
Imagine the devastation for those families who put their trust and their savings into this institution.
That must have been just a crushing blow. It's not just about the money they lost. It's about losing trust in the whole system.
Exactly. And then that mistrust was made even worse by things like redlining, which started popping up in the 20th century.
Redlining. Yeah.
Imagine entire neighborhoods, mostly Black, being marked as hazardous for investment.
So they actually drew red lines on maps to show these areas.
Yeah, these maps were created by the government-backed Homeowners Loan Corporation, and they were used by banks to deny loans and mortgages to people living in those redlined areas.
Wow.
This practice just fueled segregation. It concentrated poverty, and it denied Black families the chance to build wealth through homeownership.
Which is the cornerstone of the American dream.
Exactly.
So redlining basically choked off access to traditional credit. But then came another wave of bad stuff, right? Like those predatory practices.
Exactly. Even as Black communities were being shut out of fair lending, they were being targeted by these predatory lenders offering subprime loans.
Right, with those crazy high interest rates and all the hidden fees.
It's like a cruel catch-22. You can't get legitimate credit, so you're forced to turn to these predatory options, which just dig you deeper into debt.
And then that brings us to the 2008 financial crisis,
Right?
where all the consequences of this predatory lending came crashing down.
Black homeowners were hit the hardest by foreclosures and lost their homes at an alarming rate.
Because they were pushed into those subprime mortgages. It's like they were set up to fail.
Yeah.
So we've gone from being completely excluded to these predatory practices. And then there's this whole other layer of bias built into how credit scores are calculated.
Right. It makes you wonder how a system like credit scoring can perpetuate inequality.
Yeah, it seems so neutral. Just numbers and algorithms.
But the answers in what goes into those scores: payment history, credit utilization length of credit history. All these things can be deeply impacted by socioeconomic factors and past discrimination. So it's like this vicious cycle, If you haven't been able to get credit in the past, you're less likely to have a good credit history.
Right.
And then that hurts your score.
So it's like you're being penalized for being disadvantaged in the first place.
Exactly. And it's not just about past discrimination either. The credit scoring system also hurts people who rely on alternative financial services, like payday loans.
Oh, yeah.
Which are way more common in Black communities because they don't have as much access to traditional banking.
Payday loans are tough. I mean, they can be helpful in emergencies.
Sure.
But those interest rates and fees are crazy high.
Yeah, and they can trap borrowers in a cycle of debt.
Which just makes their credit scores even worse.
It's a system that can feel totally rigged against people who are already struggling. And the impact of a bad credit score goes way beyond just getting a loan.
Oh, absolutely.
It can affect your ability to rent an apartment, to get a job, even to get affordable insurance.
It's like this one number, your credit score, has this huge ripple effect across your whole life.
Imagine not getting a job just because of your credit score. Even if you're the best candidate for the job,
That's crazy.
it makes it even harder to improve your financial situation. It's like you're trapped in this cycle of limited opportunity.
It's tough to think about the real consequences for people who are facing these barriers.
We're not talking about numbers on a spreadsheet. We're talking about real people, real families. Their lives are being deeply affected by this inequality. That constant stress of financial instability takes a toll on your mental and physical health.
It's more than just dollars and cents. It's the anxiety, the strain on relationships, the missed opportunities. It's like the system is working against you no matter how hard you try.
That feeling of being trapped can have a huge impact on your mental health. There's a clear link between financial stress and higher rates of anxiety, depression, even chronic health conditions.
It's like a burden that gets passed down through generations.
Right.
So where do we go from here? What can we do to make the credit system more fair and equitable?
Well, the first step is recognizing that these inequities aren't inevitable.
Okay.
They're the result of choices, policies, systems that we as a society have created and that we can change.
So you're saying we can actually do something about it?
Yeah, there are concrete steps we can take to dismantle these barriers and create a system that works for everyone.
So what are some of those steps? Like what needs to happen to make things truly fair and equitable?
One crucial area is strengthening anti-discrimination laws and making sure they're actually enforced.
So like holding financial institutions accountable for discriminatory behavior.
Exactly. And cracking down on predatory lending practices.
It sounds like we need stronger regulations and better enforcement to protect people.
We also need to give underserved communities better access to financial services.
Okay. How do we do that?
Well, we could create community-based financial institutions that are more in tune with the needs of their communities.
That makes sense.
Or we could develop programs that help people build credit and get access to affordable financial products.
So meeting people where they are and giving them the tools they need to succeed.
Right. There's also a lot of talk about reforming credit scoring systems to make them more inclusive and equitable, like using alternative data points such as rent and utility payments.
Okay.
Those can show how financially responsible someone is, especially if they don't have a traditional credit history.
So we need to recognize that there are other ways to be financially responsible.
Exactly. There's also a growing movement to promote financial literacy programs so people can make informed decisions about credit and manage their money better.
Knowledge is power, right?
Right.
The more people understand about credit, the better they can navigate the system and avoid those predatory traps.
And finally, there's a growing call for reparative policies like down payment assistance programs that are specifically designed to help Black families buy homes.
To address the historical injustices that cause these disparities.
Exactly. We need to create opportunities for Black families to build wealth and achieve financial security.
To acknowledge the trauma of the past and to heal those wounds.
It requires a fundamental shift in how we as a society think about wealth, opportunity, and fairness.
So it's about moving beyond this myth of the self-made individual.
Yeah.
And acknowledging that there are systemic factors that shape our lives and our opportunities.
And realizing that true equality means not just having the same opportunities, but also having equal access to the resources and support systems that help people thrive.
So this isn't just about fixing a broken credit system. It's about creating a more just and equitable society for everyone.
Yeah.
But all of these solutions seem very focused on policy. What can individuals do to make a difference?
You're right. It's not all about top-down solutions. Individual actions matter, too. For one thing, you can educate yourself about the history of credit and how it's impacted Black communities.
Okay.
Talk to your friends and family about these issues.
Just starting a conversation can be a powerful first step.
You can also support organizations that are working to promote financial inclusion and advocate for policy changes that will create more just and equitable credit system.
So putting your money where your mouth is.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to challenge the status quo. Ask tough questions. Demand accountability from your elected officials and financial institutions. Use your voice to make a difference.
I like that.
Even the most deeply rooted systems can be reformed. And understanding the problem is the first step toward creating a more just future.
Speaking of understanding the problem, this paper we've been talking about made a point that really stuck with me.
What's that?
The idea that we need to examine our own biases and assumptions.
That's a critical point, and it can be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
We all have biases, often unconscious ones, that are shaped by the stories we've heard throughout our lives.
So how do we identify and challenge those biases, especially when it comes to things like credit and finance?
It starts with being willing to have tough conversations, to listen to perspectives that challenge our own, and to be open to learning and unlearning.
So a lot of self-reflection and critical thinking.
Exactly. We need to look at the stories we tell ourselves about success, failure, and worthiness.
Especially when it comes to money and economic opportunity.
Right. Who do we think deserves financial success, and who do we blame for their own struggles?
It's about questioning those assumptions and realizing how they might be contributing to harmful stereotypes and biases.
We need to be willing to unpack those assumptions and challenge the narratives that are keeping these inequalities in place.
It's a process.
It is, but it's essential for creating a more just and equitable society.
It's about recognizing that the stories we tell ourselves and others have real-world consequences.
That's a powerful thought.
Yeah.
The stories we tell shape our perceptions, our policies, and ultimately our actions.
It makes you wonder how much we could change if we all committed to examining our own biases and challenging the narratives that perpetuate inequality.
It's a challenge, but I think it's a necessary one. By becoming more aware of our own biases, we can start to dismantle the systems that perpetuate them and create a more just and equitable world for everyone. You know, we've been talking about all those like a big, complex issue, systemic problems.
Yeah.
It's easy to get lost in all the data and the policy stuff.
It can feel overwhelming for sure.
But I think something we miss sometimes in these conversations is the power of personal stories. You know,
Oh, okay.
the human element.
What do you mean by that?
Well, for so long, the main story we hear about credit and economic opportunity has been told from just one perspective.
Okay.
And it's a perspective that often ignores or downplays what Black communities have experienced.
So we're only getting part of the picture.
Exactly. And that missing piece has led to a lot of harmful myths and stereotypes about Black people and money.
Like the idea that Black people are bad with money or something.
Yeah, or that they don't care about being financially responsible.
Right.
Those are classic examples. And those harmful ideas have been used to justify discrimination and keep Black communities from having the same opportunities.
It's like they're using a stereotype to explain away all the systemic barriers.
Exactly. So how do we change the narrative? How do we tell a different story? I think it starts with listening to the voices of Black people who have been directly affected by these inequalities.
So giving them a platform to share their experiences and perspectives.
Exactly, because when we hear those stories, when we see the real people behind the statistics, it's harder to ignore the problem.
It makes it more real, more personal.
And it's not just about sharing the struggles, it's also about highlighting the resilience and creativity of Black communities, you know, how they found ways to thrive despite all these obstacles.
There are so many incredible stories of Black entrepreneurs and innovators and community leaders who are finding new ways to achieve economic empowerment.
Absolutely. We need to hear those stories. We need to celebrate them. Because when we change the narrative, when we see the world through a different lens, it opens up all these new possibilities.
It helps us imagine a different future.
Yeah, one where your race doesn't determine your economic success or failure.
Where everyone has a real chance to reach their full potential.
Exactly. That's something worth fighting for.
Absolutely. Well, we've covered a lot today, I think.
We have.
We've looked at the history of credit and how it's impacted. Black communities talked about the systemic barriers that are keeping things unequal and explored some potential solutions.
I hope we've given everyone a lot to think about.
Because this isn't just about credit scores or interest rates.
Right.
It's about building a more just and equitable world for everyone.
That's a goal we should all be working towards.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into such an important topic.
We encourage you to keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep pushing for change.
Even the most deeply rooted systems can be changed.
And together, we can build a better future.
That's it for the deep dive. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.